Hello, this is the third part of my COVID misinformation podcast. This part's called COVID Misinformation in the UK, the Conservative Government, its donors and J-Trig. And this explains where the source of all the COVID denial information actually came from. And I think some people will be rather surprised. This came out on Tuesday the 7th of December 2021. COVID misinformation in the UK, the Conservative Government, its donors and J-Trig. So this is the third part of my blog series on COVID. The first set out the evidence that the UK government and others went for a strategy of attempting herd immunity in the population, principally because this was the direction that their donors wanted them to go in. The main theory proposed by the alternative media was that the pandemic was all a hoax intended to lock us down indefinitely. But that simply didn't happen. In fact, the UK hesitated for 4 weeks before locking down, and then a mere 3 weeks later, the lockdown was undermined by Dominic Cummings and most people abandoned the previously strict conditions. The reason they did this was simply because their donors are from the petrochemical and petrochemical refinery industries, and they didn't want the world shutting down. They wanted people travelling to work and travelling internationally. The two industries that were hit the hardest in financial terms were the oil industry and the air travel industry. So rather than deal with the pandemic, the UK government decided to mitigate problems for their donors. This is why travel was banned for a short time from the UK, but not to the UK, keeping that revenue flowing. For the wider evidence of this, please read my blog on herd immunity. The fear of being locked down provided a perfect diversion, a distraction that people focused on to the point where the actual plans, a dangerous experiment to placate the rich elites, outrageous cronyism, and purposeful degradation of the NHS were all but ignored. In order to be able to do this, the government needed to sow seeds of doubt in the severity of the disease. This also helped give the impression that they were doing much better and had a far more robust solution to the problem than they did. So to do this, the government themselves spread misinformation via its media outlets and through other personalities that on the surface seemed anti-establishment and highly critical of the government. This was a double bluff. Please read my second blog on the misconceptions about COVID which have littered the alternative media's response to the situation. There is definitely something wrong. The government's messaging has been appalling, confusing and contradictory. They have flouted their own rules, applied these rules in ways that make no sense, and they constantly wait before imposing measures and then implement them in the most ineffective manner. This has been interpreted by the alternative media as a way to impose control by leading people to comply with the rules. But that simply isn't what happened. There is a much simpler explanation that seems to have been missed by a country mile. The point is to create chaos. This is because, as well as the oil industry and associated industries, the government's backers are also neck deep in disaster capitalism. Disaster capitalism is the practice of making money by taking advantage of a destabilizing event that causes turmoil. Put simply, you know what disaster capitalists need to grow their capital? Disasters. So the UK's response has been tailored to create this disaster that can be taken full advantage of by the government's backers. The main target is the NHS. These disaster capitalists are in the process of destroying it by overwhelming the staff and the facilities. Once this is done, they will simply privatise the industry. These same government backers are behind the spread of misinformation parroted by the alternative media. This has exacerbated the situation. Unbeknownst to them, the alternative media have spread the narratives that have caused the confusion that allows the disaster capitalists to thrive. My position is, COVID is real and it can be dangerous, and no, I didn't get that from the mainstream media. This is from my own personal perspective, having spoken with nurses on COVID wards, biochemists in labs, care home workers, and the anaesthetists from Nottingham's main hospital. I've seen people with it. I know people suffering from long COVID, and I know people that have died from it, including one woman in her 50s who has left behind 2 teenage sons. It's not the end of the world, and it could have been contained. And it should have been done and dusted by the summer of 2020. Please see my article on herd immunity for the evidence of this. But the UK government specifically his donors in the oil industry, didn't want to shut down society. The two most affected industries during the pandemic were the airlines industry and the oil refinery industry, both of which are connected to the donors of the UK, the USA, Sweden, and the Brazilian government. So, the disinformation about COVID actually comes from the government, the Treasury, and the Nudge Unit, and from think tanks owned by the Tory donors, in order to lessen the projected losses, and that is why our airports never closed. So, despite publicly saying that they're doing otherwise, the government went for herd immunity, believing it would be cheaper and less disruptive. Why? Well, to give the government an alibi. It's difficult to pin them down for mistakes when people are arguing about the severity of the disease. Whatever happens, they have a group of scientists that they can claim gave them bad advice, seeing as they have diametrically opposed views from two groups of scientists who believe the opposite of one another. You have SAGE, advising mitigation, and then you have others who advise to just let the virus rip through society. Also, to help cause chaos in the NHS and facilitate its downfall and privatisation. And finally, to ultimately blame the alt media for the disinformation that the government themselves spread, so they have grist for their mill in regards to the online safety bill and quashing what is seen as criticism of the government. This will ultimately neutralise and discredit the alt media by directing the narrative of what they believe and controlling what they actually talk about. I've said this before, they don't need to direct the mind control at the mainstream anymore. They need to direct it at those questioning things. What's the best way to control someone? Paint the pictures in their heads. Control and direct the narrative. Use memetic warfare. This is exactly what systems like JTRIG and Cambridge Analytica were designed to do, and they are working. At this point, they don't need to control the masses. They need to control those who are distrustful and those who question the government. In fact, they know that a certain swathe of the population will never trust the government. The problem is, if they know, at least to a degree, how this group will react, this reaction can be gamed in their advantage. It's pretty much the same people who tricked the alt media regarding Brexit, telling them that what they were doing is anti-establishment, when in reality these actions have been seeded by the establishment to allow them to get exactly what they want. Please read my previous blogs on herd immunity and the misconceptions about COVID repeated by the alternative media. Disinformation network and their connections to the government. So let's look at the sources of this misinformation and see if there are any commonalities that could tie them together. Sunita Gupta was one of the chief proponents of the herd immunity strategy. She has appeared in several publications and is a regular on talk radio. She claimed that the UK had already achieved herd immunity as early as March 2020. She is opposed to any type of lockdown, masks, or mitigation strategies. Although appearing critical of the government, she is actually supported by the UK Nudge Unit, with her ideas promoted by Sir Gru Communications, which is the publicity arm of the Behavioural Insights team, better known as the Nudge Unit. She also received payments from George von Opel, a Tory donor who was keen on her promoting herd immunity. George von Opel was also one of the signatories of the Great Barrington Declaration, which promoted herd immunity. In September of 2020, she personally advised the government to try herd immunity. This was the reason that the UK did not have a circuit break lockdown that autumn. Gupta was also a signatory for the Great Barrington Declaration, which is funded by the think tank AEIR, which is populated by Tory donors from the oil industry. Her partner, Alex Katia, also works for a firm called Animal Dynamics, who do classified research for the Ministry of Defence. Katia's business partner in Animal Dynamics is William Mark Evans, formerly of Goldman Sachs, and extensively connected to the oil industry. Katia was actually one of the organisers of the Great Barrington Declaration that called on the UK government to pursue herd immunity. Gupta also promoted the idea that lockdowns kill more than the disease, and this is not true. In fact, the opposite is true, lockdowns slow transmission. The idea actually came from the government themselves, specifically from the UK HM Treasury. They published the idea via their think tank, Economic Insight. The reason they did this was simple. Alongside the desire for frugality from the Tory donors, the Treasury also didn't want to spend money bailing out people and businesses, so if they could pour water on the efficacy of lockdowns, it would be far cheaper for them. Alex Kachia and Sunita Gupta have recently set up a charity offshoot from the Great Barrington Declaration called Collateral Global. Collateral Global's main trustees are Sunita Gupta and Alex Kachia, and its scientific advisors are Martin Kulldorff and Jay Bhattacharya, who both were integral to the Great Barrington Declaration. The all-party parliamentary group, the APPG, on pandemic response and recovery was set up in September and is chaired by Conservative MP Esther McVeigh. She is joined in the APPG by Conservative MP Miriam Cates and Conservative MP Jacqueline Foster, Baroness Foster of Oxton. Parliamentary records show that Collateral Global is the administrative body behind the APPG and actually finances it. Collateral Global has provided over £30,000 to APPG. Another member of APPG is Labour MP Graham Stringer. Stringer just so happens to be a trustee of the Koch-connected Global Warming Policy Foundation, Britain's most prominent climate science denial lobby group, which takes funds from fossil fuel companies. The APPG also regularly interacts with the Heart Group, who are supposed to be completely independent. More on them later. Carl Hennigan, of the very official-sounding Centre for Evidence-Based Medicine, has also been seen regularly on talk radio and in articles for The Telegraph, Express and Daily Mail. Hennigan has also had several since-debunked articles published in The Spectator. Now, this institution that Hennigan is from isn't quite as impartial or evidence-based as it wishes to appear. The institute was financed by donors to the Trump campaign, part of the UK-USA trade deal that seeks to privatise the NHS. Many Trump supporters spent a huge amount of time downplaying the virus for exactly the same reason as the Tory donors: an alibi. If less people died than is believed, or if people are inclined to believe that the stats are cooked, then Trump and Johnson didn't do quite as badly as it seems. It's a simple tactic, but it's surprisingly effective. Hennigan is opposed to any type of mitigation and advised the government to go for herd immunity. Specifically, the institution he works for is financed by the Willits, a wealthy couple who are extremely close to the Trump campaign. The Willits are board members of the RAI. The RAI, or Oxford University's Rothmere American Institute to give it its full title, is concerned with studying America and its place in the world. It was named after Tory donor Viscount Rothmere. Also on the board for the RAI is their friend Christopher Burnham, who worked with the Trump campaign and makes his money through investments into private healthcare. Toby Young is connected to the Tory government and was previously appointed to the government's Office for Students. Young has also written for the Tory donor-owned Daily Mail, the Tory donor-owned Telegraph and the Tory donor-owned Spectator. Young runs the media outlets Lockdown Skeptics and the Daily Sceptic, who exist to oppose any measures taken against the spread of COVID. Young is also a member of the Tory government's FSU, or Free Speech Union. In 2020, the FSU attempted to sue Ofcom for censoring COVID dissidents, which meant censoring Toby Young when he lied about the pandemic. The FSU lost, with this spurious case being described as not properly arguable, premised on misinterpretation, and they were ordered to pay over £16,000 in costs. Young is totally against any type of mitigation against COVID. Ipso, the media regulation body, found that Young had spread misinformation about COVID via his writing in The Telegraph. Throughout 2020, Young wrote several pieces suggesting over and over again that the pandemic was over. Peter Hitchens has been a very loud voice in the anti-lockdown, anti-masks, anti-social distancing crowd. He's a columnist for the pro-Tory anti-lockdown Daily Mail, which is owned by John Harmsworth, or Viscount Rothmere IV, and he is, can you guess, a Tory donor. He is also totally against any type of protective measures and has spoken out against lockdowns, social distancing, mask wearing, etc. Hitchens has constantly downplayed the dangers of the virus in his weekly column, on Twitter, and in any publications that will publish or listen to his rubbish. Spiked Online is a media outlet owned by Koch Industries, who are oil refinery and tangential Tory donors, and also part of the UK-USA trade deal to privatise the NHS. This publication has spent the entire pandemic claiming it wasn't that serious and that the alleviation measures were totally unnecessary. It gives a regular platform to various people mentioned in this article. Turning Point UK is literally the propaganda arm of Koch Industries and has spent the entire pandemic also downplaying the severity and opposing mitigation strategies. Turning Point is particularly skilled at producing memes that spread slogans designed to antagonise and create false narratives. John Mappin runs Turning Point UK and is also a member of the Church of Scientology. The Church of Scientology was aggressively pro-Trump as he gave them a huge tax break. John Mappin, who has been interviewed by several prominent members of the alternative media and runs Camelot TV, is an avid QAnon promoter, which is at best a CIA psyop and at worst a collective mental health incident. And Mappin was listed as having flown on Jeffrey Epstein's Lolita Express. The alternative media has never pressed him on this. I wonder why. John Mappin is also friends with John Carlton, a Scientologist who helped raise funds for Stand Up X, the group that was part of arranging the Trafalgar Square protests. John Carlton is listed as a financial officer for a company called Exotech, which was created to promote a 5G controlled automation system that can be put into people's home. Rather embarrassing, as at that protest, liars and self-promotion experts Mark Steele and Kate Shemrani both stated that 5G was the real cause of any illness. More embarrassingly, the firm Exotech also included two other Scientologists. One chap was called Peter Warren, a man who had previously defrauded investors for $12 million. The other was a chap called Lord McNair. Lord Duncan McNair is both a hereditary peer in the UK House of Lords and a hardcore Scientologist. He spent his career in the House of Lords defending the Church of Scientology, earning him the nickname Lord Scientology. He is also a hard Brexit fellow. Several people involved in the COVID denial network have been entertained by Mappin at his Cornwall castle and have even received funding or gifts from the billionaire head of Koch Industries' propaganda arm. Again, no one in the alternative media thought this was strange. People who were more than willing to receive his patronage include Piers Corbyn, Louise Hampton, Lawrence Fox, James Melville, James Dellingpole, Fiona Hind, and Dr. Asim Malhotra. Vernon Coleman, who received a strange signal boost during the pandemic, is a member of the far-right anti-EU English Democrats who, with the Church of Scientology, organised the protest marches in Trafalgar Square. This was actually done with the permission of the government. You see, in order to book Trafalgar Square, you have to go through the government's own website. It is rather good of this tyrannical regime to allow a protest against their tyranny. Coleman is an AIDS denialist and has written books about his desire to privatise the NHS. He has gone from COVID doesn't exist to it's just the flu to doctors and nurses are murdering patients, which is a none-too-subtle attempt to move any blame for deaths away from the government and to blame the NHS, which will then be declared not fit for purpose. He is also a strong supporter of Brexit. He has previously worked for The Sun, famously penning AIDS denial material that stated only gay people could catch the disease and inferring that AIDS was actually punishment for gay people's lifestyle choices. The Spectator and The Telegraph are both owned by the Barclay brothers, who are Tory donors. These publications have also spent the entire pandemic telling people that no mitigation is required, that the virus isn't serious. They have criticised all lockdown and social distancing measures. The Times, The Sun, Talk Radio, Fox News and Sky News are all owned by Rupert Murdoch, who is a Tory donor. Similarly, they have also downplayed the severity and poured scorn on any measures to lessen the effects. Working for talk radio, you have lifelong Tory Julia Hartley-Brewer, who regularly promotes people like Carl Hennigan, Toby Young, Carol Sikora, Sunita Gupta, MP Desmond Swayne, and Mike Yeadon. All have the same ideas about the pandemic. The Express newspaper is owned by Tory donor Richard Desmond and has uniformly criticised any measures to protect the public. Tucker Carlson works for Fox News and receives money from Koch Industries, and he has gone from "it doesn't exist" to "it's just the flu" to "safety measures aren't needed" to "vaccines are pointless and might even be dangerous." The multimillionaire heir to the Swanson TV dinner fortune has, for some reason, been adopted by certain elements of the alternative media as a trustworthy and reliable source, as opposed to the reality of being a total cunt. Mike Yeadon runs PCR claims with Cambridge Analytica manipulation expert Patrick Fagan. He also runs Unlocked UK, which aside from Patrick Fagan, also includes members of the Tory government's COVID research group. He was behind the ridiculous claim that PCR tests, which he himself has never, ever seen being done or done himself, gives 90% false positives. This bullshit was also spread by Toby Young and Julia Hartley-Brewer, and this is incredibly easily debunked. If that was true, we would see 90% positive cases everywhere, and we would never see no cases at all. But we do, because Yeadon is simply lying. In December 2020, having been kicked off Twitter for racism and anti-Islam bigotry, Michael Yeadon started a Facebook news channel denying COVID and the PCR tests called Unlocked United Kingdom. Yeadon was helped in this endeavour by Patrick Fagan of Cambridge Analytica. Unlock's chairman and co-director of Unlock UK Limited is former Conservative Party donor turned Brexit Party MEP Ben Habib, who had previously backed Yeadon's social media career. Carol Sikora, who was part of the Trump presidential campaign, advised the UK government to go for herd immunity and is connected to Save Our Rights group, which is a supposedly anti-establishment group actually run via the Tory government with the help of Conservative MP, EU critic and lockdown critic Desmond Swayne. CRG, COVID research group member Steve Baker, who was also previously the chairman of the ERG, the European Research Group, which is a hard Brexit support group, is also involved. All have been anti-lockdown, anti-mask and anti-social distancing. Sikora is firmly of the opinion that the NHS should be privatised. Carol Sikora refers to the current NHS as the last bastion of communism. Lawrence Fox is connected to IEA, the Institute for Economic Affairs, which is a think tank connected to Koch Industries, the Heritage Foundation, and also part of the UK-USA trade deal that seeks to privatise the NHS. The failed actor, failed singer, failed husband, failed human being has been a particularly gobby mouthpiece in all of this, probably because it's literally his last stab at anything approaching relevance. Lawrence Fox received £5 million to start a political party called Reclaim Britain. The party was launched during his attendance at a virtual fringe event on the free speech crisis run by the IEA think tank. Piers Corbyn has also spoken several times at the behest of the IEA. The IEA was connected to Cambridge Analytica's campaign, which was ultimately designed to get us to leave the EU and privatise the NHS, with American firms taking up the slack. Corbyn still promotes the idea that 5G causes the virus. He was behind the incredibly disingenuous Freedom of Information Act campaign, in which they asked for something impossible and claimed that this was proof that the virus doesn't exist. It was a very, very cheap con trick. Please see my Misconceptions Debunked article for the broader explanation to this. His credibility, such as it is, was seriously called into doubt again when he was exposed as taking what he believed to be a bribe of £10,000 in return for avoiding certain topics in his unhinged rants. He happily accepted the money and agreed to downplay certain subjects and even concocted a cover story to explain how he got the money, seeing as the Sting coordinators had pretended to be representatives of Big Pharma. He happily took the money and agreed on camera to abandon his principles and lie about it to conceal the payment. Patrick Vallance and David Halpern, who sit on the SAGE Advisory Board, are actually members of the Nudge Unit. The Nudge Unit, or Behavioural Insight, seeks to surreptitiously alter the public's behaviour without the public knowing. The Nudge Unit is the nickname for the Behavioural Insights team. It is essentially a mind control unit. Martin Kulldorff of the Great Barrington Declaration works for the Brownstone Institute, which is indirectly funded by Coke Industries through Jeffrey Tucker of George Mason University, which is a slush fund for Coke Industries. The Great Barrington Declaration called for the isolating of the elderly and the vulnerable until herd immunity was reached. They never explained how these vulnerable people would reintegrate into a society where COVID is endemic and they still have no immunity. But sod them. The Great Barrington Declaration itself was created by the think tank AEIR, who aside from COVID denial promotes sweatshops as a good thing. No, seriously they do. AEIR receive funding from Coke Industries via the Cato Institute and are populated by members of the oil industry and fossil fuel industry. This is the real reason this think tank was opposed to lockdowns. James Delingpole works for Breitbart, the Mercer and Bannon owned and ran media outlet with connections to the Heritage Foundation, the CNP, and part of the Cambridge Analytica mind control program. Delingpole has also spent the entire pandemic downplaying it and acting persecuted. His podcast provides a regular platform for whinging about safety measures and moaning that this is all a con. Dominic Cummings, who was influential in both the decision for the government to pursue herd immunity and the person who undermined the lockdown strategy after just a few weeks, was famously involved with Cambridge Analytica. His colleague from the Cambridge Analytica arranged Vote Leave campaign, Ben Warner, was also brought in to help advise the SAGE board. Keep Britain Free was founded by billionaire tax exile Simon Dolan. He opposed all lockdowns and masks, but this was only after his firm was refused a contract to provide masks to the UK government. Stay classy. Simon Dolan produced the 2019 David Icke film Renegade. Dolan is a strong proponent of Brexit, despite living in tax exile Monaco, and he crowdfunded a spurious campaign to sue the government for lockdowns using Brexit lawyer Francis Hoare. The campaign managed to raise over £60,000 for their ridiculous cause that simply disappeared when inevitably their case was thrown out. In January 2022, the Secretary of State for Foreign Affairs, Liz Truss, took a trip to Belfast to discuss the potential next steps for Brexit. I'll tell you what they are. They intend to hang Ireland out to dry, and decided to charter a private jet. The company that she approached was Yota Aviation, which is owned by Simon Dolan. The cost to the taxpayer for this day trip was £500,000. No one in the alternative media thought that this connection was in any way odd. America's frontline doctors, who existed solely to hype up ineffective medicines and then sell them at a massively inflated price, were financed by the CNP, the Council for National Policy, which is the think tank above the Heritage Foundation. The group, which also affiliates itself with the Coke Industries created Tea Party movement, includes grifter Simone Gold, who is currently under investigation for storming the US Capitol building on January the 6th, and Stella Emanuel, who genuinely believes that vaginal problems are caused by demons. Yes, that's right, fanny demons. The initial protests against the lockdown in America were actually arranged by the Heritage Foundation, a think tank populated mostly by members of the oil industry, including the Kochs, the Mercers, the DeVos family, Steve Bannon, and others. The Heritage Foundation has done more to impinge on the rights of the working man than a little. They have spent literally years lobbying to reduce workers' rights by rolling back worker safety, reducing workers' holidays and pay, rolling back environmental protections and welfare protections, and reducing medical cover. They also lobby to reduce the availability of food stamps and recently gained themselves a 25% tax break. Mostly, they're concerned with bypassing workers' rights and tax and all that pesky stuff. So the idea that they were solely concerned with the working man not being able to work was frankly laughable. Its parent think tank, the CNP, fabricated the Filmer Hospitals debacle, claiming that hospitals were empty when they were not. This was started by CNP member Jason Jones. The Heart Group, Health Advisory and Recovery Team, describes itself as a group of highly qualified UK doctors, scientists, economists, psychologists, and other academic experts who came together over shared concerns about policy and guidance recommendations relating to the COVID-19 pandemic. The group was exposed by an investigation by Logically magazine, who gained access to their private email chats. These chats revealed that the group knowingly spread false information about COVID and was connected to several Conservative MPs. The group branded itself as giving a credible second opinion for politicians, the media, business, and the wider public, but it is clearly designed to spread disinformation. They state that they want to wrestle back control from SAGE, that's the Scientific Advisory Board. As Logically magazine detailed, among the group's most active and notable contributors are businessman and political activist Nerys Bernard, former Pfizer executive, widely cited in anti-vax circles Dr. Michael Yeadon, pathologist Dr. Claire Craig, export credit specialist and libertarian Baron Bernie de Haldervan, anti-mask activist Gemma Moran, retired paediatrician and Us For Them campaigner Ros Jones, and Anna Rayner, who once described herself as a homeopath specialising in treatment of autism and related disorders, vaccine damage, and heavy metal toxicity. They also arranged campaigns of harassment against doctors and scientists who they disagree with, and suggested flooding vaccination centres with fake emails. They promote ideas such as the vaccines make you magnetic, the false idea that vaccines are punishable under the Nuremberg Code, and they promote medicines that just don't work, giving the impression of a huge government cover-up. They've been connected to the Conservative government's COVID research group, a collection of COVID sceptical Conservative MPs. They have also helped coordinate messaging, discouraging mitigation strategies through these MPs. They also have relationships with Toby Young's Lockdown Skeptics and the Daily Sceptic, and anti-lockdown groups such as Us For Them. At the thematic centre of the group's beliefs is a distrust of mainstream media and a conviction that the government's agenda was to keep the UK population under lockdown indefinitely, which you may recall didn't happen. Leaks from the group's private email chat group show that they were introduced to the CRG and Conservative MP Steve Baker by Conservative MP Andrew Rossendale, so yet again, despite the veneer of anti-establishment, they're actually driven by members of the Conservative government. They have also spread lies such as mRNA vaccines cannot be considered vaccines, that the vaccines were rushed through testing, and they repeat the views of the HM Treasury that lockdowns harm more than they help. Unlocked is an online media outlet that promotes anything anti-lockdown, anti-mask, or anti-vaccine passport, and it was set up by former Brexit Party MP Martin Daubney alongside Leslie Caton, who was the former Chief of Staff for the Brexit Party, and Ben Habib of the Brexit Party. They regularly championed Simon Dolan as well as the Conservative MP Desmond Swayne. They also champion Andrew Bridgen, who is hard Brexit, John Redwood, who is hard Brexit, and both happen to be Conservative MPs. Daubney also spends a lot of time chatting with his mate Lawrence Fox. The channel also promoted Mike Yeadon with a lengthy interview published in November 2020. Unfortunately for them, it was taken from YouTube after just 48 hours for being littered with outright lies. Another YouTube channel which purports to be for the people, but is in fact another thinly disguised propaganda node, is Resistance GB. The channel preaches the same anti-lockdown claptrap that proponents of herd immunity tend to spout, and has a strange worship of mentalist Piers Corbyn. It will perhaps be no surprise to find out that the channel was started by ex-Conservative Party councillor William Coleshill. Resistance GB were heavily involved with Simon Dolan and Francis Hawes' spurious lawsuit /grift against the lockdown. Then there's the Together Declaration, who has sprung up recently saying exactly the same thing as everyone else and organising marches against vaccine passports that currently don't exist. They seem to be a who's who of well-known disinformation artists. They include Dr. Tony Hinton, a consultant that spends his days lying about COVID on Twitter, even claiming that the virus has never been proven to exist. Dr. Claire Craig, an unemployed pathologist and a member of Heart Group, whose emails exposed her as knowingly lying about COVID. These lies include death certificates being forged by doctors to create the image of a pandemic. Dr. Craig doesn't currently hold a license to practice medicine and deleted every single tweet that she made in the entirety of 2020, mostly because none of her predictions came true and it had been shown that she'd been spreading complete lies. This group also includes Dr. Renee Honderkamp, a GP that used to promote the use of masks and social distancing until she was approached by the Heart Group, who made her a minor celebrity on the internet. And now she regularly appears on talk radio to say that masks don't work, which is a lie. Dr. Rosamund Jones, who is a part of Heart, is also a member of Together. Conservative MP Steve Baker, who is also a member of the CRG and former chairman of the ERG, is also amongst the members of Together. Conservative MPs Esther McVeigh, who is hard Brexit, and Desmond Swayne, who is hard Brexit, are also in the group. In a recent video released by anti-vaxxer Fiona Hind, also known as Fiona Rose Diamond, it was revealed that MP Mark Francois of the Conservative Party, who is the current chair of the hard Brexit support group, the ERG, is also backing the Together Declaration. MPs Philip Davis, Henry Smith and Chris Green, all hard Brexit voters, are also members. Journalist Christopher Snowdon, who works for the Coke-owned Spiked magazine, is also a member. David Curtin, horrible homophobic member of the Heritage Party, is also a member. Hard Brexit desiring Richard Tice is also a member, as is Brexit lawyer Francis Hoare and Brexit enthusiast and ex-Conservative MP Ben Habib. Toby Young of the Conservatives FSU is also a member of the Together Declaration. Carol Sikora is also a member. Less illustrious members include crap comedian Lee Hurst, Richard Fairbrass of shit novelty pop act Right Said Fred, woman who sifts through human shit Gillian McKeith, piss-poor journalist James Melville, Murdoch mouthpiece Julia Hartley-Brewer, idiot who lied about her psychological qualifications Emma Kenny. Yeah, she's not actually a qualified psychologist, she just pretends and plays the part on television. Matt Letitia, what a dickhead. Alan Partridge cohort Sue Cook, Anna Breeze, Louise Creffield, who was the founder of the Tory-backed Save Our Rights, biased journalist and Tory cheerleader Alison Pearson, rather obvious government stooge and former founder of Quilliam, Majid Nawaz, Dr. Zoe Harcombe, PhD, a rubbish nutritionist that is so desperate to show that she's an authority that she uses doctor and PhD at the same time, in exactly the same way that a moron would. These are all members of the supposedly anti-establishment Together Declaration. Then you have a series of people such as Andrew Kaufman and Thomas Cowan, who seems to come from nowhere and had an enormous signal boost and basically sent out the message, it's fine, there's no pandemic, which translates to, if there is no pandemic, then people aren't dying, and therefore the government isn't doing that badly. It's a double bluff, and sadly, the alternative media fell for it hook, line and sinker, and just repeated the talking points raised by the people listed above. You also have a series of useful idiots and grifters who just took advantage of people's frustrations and lied to them to make money and draw adoration from a demographic, such as Bev Turner, Anna Breeze, Gillian McKeith, Right Said Fred. In propaganda terms, these people are called useful idiots. So we can see that the common through line is Tory, donor, hard Brexit, or in some way connected to the Trump and USA trade deal, which was the whole purpose of Brexit. Similarly to Brexit, this network of COVID misinformation presents itself as anti-establishment, however, with the fact that members of the government, donors to the government, and the government departments such as the Nudge Unit and the HM Treasury and the MOD are connected to this information proves otherwise. A recent example of this type of propaganda, which I'm ashamed to say was also spread by the alternative media without due diligence, was a supposed paper from Johns Hopkins University that claimed lockdowns were ineffective and only had a marginal, if any, effect on the death toll. Spoilers! This paper, promoted heavily by Tory donor-owned The Telegraph, the Tory donor-owned Daily Mail, and the Tory donor-owned Fox News, was utter shit. Firstly, the paper, titled A Literature Review and Meta-Analysis of the Effects of Lockdown on COVID-19 Mortality, was not peer-reviewed. It was simply a working paper, which is a hypothetical study. Secondly, it wasn't from Johns Hopkins University. They lied in order to try and gain some credibility. So where was the paper actually from? Well, the lead author of the paper, Steve Honker, is actually a representative of Koch Industries, specifically the Koch Industries-funded Cato Institute. The paper claimed to be a meta-analysis, which means that it looks at various different papers and collects any commonalities, but it did no such thing. The paper, if you actually read it, found a noted benefit from masks, business closures, border closures, and school closures, but it presents the data in such a way that it appears to show the opposite of the facts. Interestingly, this meta-study actually based its conclusions on just one paper. If you think that might not be enough for a meta-study, you'd be correct, but it gets worse, much, much worse. They lied about the paper they used. The only paper that the meta-study looked at found a benefit in lockdowns. However, this supposed meta-study came to a very different conclusion. The paper wasn't sloppy, it was just dishonest. Memetic warfare. Much of this misinformation is spread via the mechanism of memetic warfare. Memetic warfare is a modern type of information warfare and psychological warfare involving the propagation of memes on social media. Most of these anti-COVID ideas were spread either via memes or short interview clips. The idea is to get certain phrases, slogans, tropes, or ideas spread by memes into the public consciousness. These could be slogans such as, "The virus has a 99.9% recovery rate," or "It's just the flu," or misinformation about the validity of the tests. We've seen all of these slogans, and none of them are true. If you repeat these slogans long enough, however, they become truisms, and at that point, it is incredibly difficult to unpick someone's belief structure, even if the foundations of this belief structure are provably false. But as I said earlier, they don't need to control the mainstream. They're content. They need to control the alt media. So how are they going to do this? Well, by using the Walter Lippmann technique of painting pictures in people's heads, creating the facts, and setting the narrative. This is particularly important since the dawn of the internet. Rather than the TV channels, there are now dozens of avenues that people can consume information from. So they need to control the information. This is called controlling the narrative, and it isn't a new tactic of control. Painting the pictures in people's heads. In his most famous work, Public Opinion, which was published in 1922, Walter Lippmann compared the masses to a great beast and a bewildered herd that needed, for its own good, to be guided by a responsible governing class, namely the established order of the elite. He described the ruling elite as a specialized class whose interests reached beyond the locality. In Lippmann's considered view, the bewildered herd, that's you remember, has its function to be the interested spectators of action, meaning that the majority of people should not participate in anything of any real importance. The direction of the general public's lives are dictated and directed for them by the intelligentsia of the ruling classes. Participation in the running of the world, in Lippmann's opinion, was the duty of the responsible man, namely the elites, rather than the average man on the street. One important concept presented by Lippmann was called the manufacture of consent, which is, in short, the manipulation of public opinion to accept the specific agenda of the ruling class. In Lippmann's opinion, the general public was not qualified to reason and to decide on the most important issues. It is therefore important for the elite to decide for their own good and then sell those decisions to the masses. That the manufacture of consent is capable of great refinements, no one, I think, denies. The process by which public opinions arise is certainly no less intricate than it has appeared in these pages, and the opportunities for manipulation open to anyone who understands the process are plain enough. As a result of psychological research, coupled with the modern means of communication, the practice of democracy has turned a corner. A revolution is taking place, infinitely more significant than any shifting of economic power. Under the impact of propaganda, not necessarily in the sinister meaning of the word alone, the old constants of our thinking have become variables. It is no longer possible, for example, to believe in the original dogma of democracy, that the knowledge needed for the management of human affairs comes up spontaneously from the human heart. Where we act on that theory, we expose ourselves to self-deception and to forms of persuasion that we cannot verify. It has been demonstrated that we cannot rely upon intuition, conscious, or the accidents of casual opinion if we are to deal with the world beyond our reach. The opening chapter in Lippmann's book, Public Opinion, is titled The World Outside and the Pictures in Our Heads. In this, he explained that the pictures in people's minds, the way that they see things and their assumptions of what is real, is their method to interpret roles and positions in the world. People's understanding of the world through these conceptualized pictures denotes how people conduct themselves in everyday situations. The object of study of the public opinion social analyst is reality as defined by internal perception or images of that reality. Public opinion deals with indirect, unseen, and puzzling facts, and there is nothing obvious about them. The situations to which the public opinions refer are known as opinions. The pictures inside the heads of these human beings, the pictures of themselves, of others, of their needs, purposes, and relationships, are their public opinions. Those pictures which are acted upon by groups of people or by individuals acting in the name of groups are public opinion with capital letters. The picture inside so often misleads men in their dealings with the world outside. Lippmann then explained how this can be best employed in the manipulation of opinions. This then will be the clue to our inquiry. We shall assume that what each man does is based not on direct and certain knowledge, but on pictures made by himself or given to him. If his atlas tells him that the world is flat, he will not sail near what he believes to be the edge of our planet for fear of falling off. If his maps include a fountain of eternal youth, a Ponce de Leon will go in quest of it. If someone digs up yellow dirt that looks like gold, he will for a time act exactly as if he's found gold. The way in which the world is imagined determines at any particular moment what men will do. It does not determine what they will achieve. It determines their efforts, their feelings, their hopes, not their accomplishments and results. Going back to public opinion, Lippmann defined propaganda as such. On the formulation by propaganda of a class conscious group, but what is propaganda, if not the effort to alter the picture to which men respond, to substitute one social pattern for another? What is class consciousness but a way of realizing the world? National consciousness, but another way. Lippmann believed that there must exist an independent public opinion organisation that makes unseen facts available to the politicians, the media, and the heads of industry. He said, I argue that representative government, either in what is ordinarily called politics or in industry, cannot be worked successfully, no matter what the basis of an election, unless there is an independent, expert organisation for making the unseen facts intelligible to those who have to make the decisions. My conclusion is that public opinions must be organised for the press if they are to be sound, not by the press, as is the case today. The rise of the red herring. Ever since Sandy Hook, the alternative media has been flooded with what I think are red herrings. Principally, this is the idea that everything is fake or street theatre using crisis actors. Frankly, this is just silly. The intelligence agencies kill people. Why would they risk using actors, threatened with death if they reveal the truth, when it would just be simpler to just carry out the attacks? Also, have you ever met an actor that didn't want credit for their role? No, you haven't. They love the praise and adoration. So how would you keep these crisis actors quiet? The point of this theory is to distract from real investigation, to direct the investigation in a certain way so that anything that contradicts the idea that this is all fake is dismissed. This serves to control what is investigated, but it also isolates the conspiracy theorist by offending the sensibilities of the mainstream. Suggesting that children didn't die or that the school massacres are elaborate hoaxes horrifies most people and demonizes the insensitive conspiracy theorist. This is exactly what it's supposed to do. Usually, this leads to a doubling down from the theorist, isolating them further and convincing them that they are right. In my mind, this is because, with the rise of the internet, the Columbine shooting was poured over again and again, and several discrepancies with the official story came to light. That couldn't happen again. Now, if you wish to control an investigation, provide the evidence. Seed red herrings that seem plausible on the surface, but actually lead investigation well wide of the mark. They have had the pictures painted in their heads, and then they have acted accordingly. Since then, the alternative media has been inundated with utter dribbling bollocks, such as flat earth, crisis actors for every event, everything is fake, QAnon, Trump worship, Hitler worship, the Brexit campaign, and Pizzagate. All total nonsense. But the same thing is happening here. People are dying, and the alternative media is not only denying this reality, but it has been tricked into mocking the sheeple who believe the hoax, telling bereaved relatives that they are liars, and even wishing death on those who have taken the vaccine. This just serves to alienate the alternative media and push them further to the fringe, to the point where everything they say is dismissed because people are sick of them, which is completely and entirely the point. The alternative media is being used and being set up as the bad guy. They have been tricked not only into backing the wrong horse, but this will permanently stain the reputation of anyone questioning the government. Similar to flat earthers and crisis actor theorists, anti-vaxxers and COVID denialists will simply be dismissed as easily led fools whose theories are frankly offensive. There is also the possibility that they're setting themselves up to take the blame for this crisis dragging on, because the politicians sure as shit won't take any responsibility. All this reminds me of J-Trig and other similar programs designed to manipulate users of the internet without their knowledge. J-Trig. Put simply, J-Trig is an internet manipulation program designed and used by GCHQ, which exists to seed false information into the internet. In their own words, among the core self-identified purposes of J-Trig are two tactics. One, to inject all sorts of false material onto the internet in order to destroy the reputation of its targets. And two, to use social sciences and other techniques to manipulate online discussion and activism to generate outcomes it considers desirable. To see how extremist these programs are, just consider the tactics they boast of using to achieve those ends. False flag operations, posting material to the internet and falsely attributing it to someone else. Fake victim blog posts, pretending to be a victim of the individual whose reputation they want to destroy, and posting negative information on various forums. The program exists to create beliefs on the internet that are then taken as truisms and shift the opinions and beliefs of the target. GCHQ describes the purpose of J-Trig in starkly clear terms, using online techniques to make something happen in the real or cyber world, including information ops, influence, or disruption. As described in the Intercept magazine, this is not limited to the UK. Critically, the targets for this deceit and reputation destruction extend far beyond the customary roster of normal spycraft, which is hostile nations and their leaders, military agencies, and intelligence services. In fact, the discussion of many of these techniques occurs in the context of using them in lieu of traditional law enforcement against people suspected, but not charged or convicted, of ordinary crimes or, broadly still, hacktivism, meaning those who use online protest activity for political ends. Government plans to monitor and influence internet communications and covertly infiltrate online communities in order to sow dissension and disseminate false information have long been a source of speculation. Harvard law professor Cass Sunstein, a close Obama advisor, and the White House's former head of the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs, wrote a controversial paper in 2008 proposing that the US government employs teams of covert agents and pseudo-independent advocates to cognitively infiltrate online groups and websites as well as other activist groups. Sunstein also proposed sending covert agents into chat rooms, online social networks, or even real space groups, which spread what he views as false and damaging conspiracy theories about the government. Ironically, the very same Sunstein was recently named by Obama to serve as a key member of the NSA review panel created by the White House, one that, while disputing key NSA claims, proceeded to propose many cosmetic reforms to the agency's powers, most of which were actually ignored by the president who appointed them. Cass Sunstein was the creator of nudge theory, the tactic of surreptitiously directing a population's behaviour. The nudge unit, or the Behavioural Insight Group, has been behind much of the COVID response from the UK government. Patrick Vallance and David Halpern of the nudge unit are sitting on the SAGE advisory board for some unexplained reason. The J-Trig documents show that GCHQ is actively involved in spreading false information to discredit its targets, and its targets are anyone that is deemed an enemy or threat to the state. Then there is the use of psychology and other social sciences to not only understand but shape and control how online activism and discourse unfolds. Today's newly published documents touts the work of GCHQ's Human Science Operations Cells devoted to online human intelligence and strategic influence and disruption. So, similarly to the tactics of programs like Cambridge Analytica, the point is to create false information that they know will appeal to a particular group, having learned about that group by studying them, then getting that group to repeat and spread the false information until it becomes core to their identity. Under the title Online Covert Action, the document details a variety of means to engage in influence and info ops, as well as disruption and computer net attack, while dissecting how human beings can be manipulated using leaders, using trust, obedience, and compliance. The document lays out theories of how humans interact with one another, particularly online, and then they attempt to identify ways to influence the outcomes, or game the outcomes. One specific article, released by Edward Snowden, is pertaining to J-Trig, is called The Art of Deception, Training for Online Covert Operations, and this appears to have been compiled by GCHQ's Human Science Operations Cell, a group who focuses on online human intelligence and the strategic influence and disruption. Although the document contains only a slideshow, it is clear what techniques they're using to influence people. These include profiling of cultures and personality, research on persuasion, research on cognitive biases and scams, research on the psychology of stage magic, and organizational psychology. It is clear from the document that these techniques are aimed at groups of like-minded people and not individual targets. Manipulation of groups indicates that this is a PSYOP technique. Perhaps the key thing to note is the sense-making component. Sense-making is a key concept in management science that just describes the different ways in which people come to the conclusions about the meaning and significance of things. So put simply, J-Trig gives an audience an explanation and a backing to the narrative it is trying to sell. An example could be, groups know that the virus isn't serious and that the tests don't work, etc., which is the created narrative. So the only possible explanation for this lie is to lock us down or to gain some type of power control. That is the sense-making of the narrative. The narrative is the virus is fake. The sense-making is, well, it must be to lock us down. Except that didn't happen. The GCHQ documents show that they treat individuals as like naive intelligence analysts who are trying to piece together their own understanding of the world, and they aim to exploit some of the weaknesses in this process. The big, messy concept map slides mention destructive organizational psychology, which presumably refers to using the understanding of what keeps organizations together to break them apart. One slide just says, we want to build cyber magicians. Who are these cyber magicians? These cyber magicians are trusted authority figures who unknowingly spread the false information to their followers. They feed the lies to the influencers who spread these lies to their followers, creating the narrative and giving an explanation for what is happening in the world. The only problem being that the original information is incorrect. It is designed to lead people away from the truth, but at the same time provide a plausible scenario or meaning or sense making for what is happening. And this is definitely what is happening in the UK regards COVID in the alternative media. They were convinced that this was a scam, a fake event, rather than a badly run event that ignored the safety of the public to appease the rich donors of the government. JTRIG has been active for over a decade. Known as effects operations, the work of JTRIG had become a major part of GCHQ's operations by 2010. The unit's online propaganda efforts, named Online Covert Action, utilise mass messaging and the pushing of stories via the mediums of Twitter, Flickr, Facebook and YouTube. The journalist Glenn Greenwald published a series of NSA files in 2015 that spoke about other JTRIG operations, specifically in the area of manipulating online communities. This ties into the concept that it isn't the mainstream being targeted anymore, it's the alternative media. They do this by studying you to see what makes you tick, introducing information that they know will appeal to you and makes sense, but is ultimately false. They then encourage you to repeat, spread, and share this false information, creating the narrative for that group or community. In these documents provided by Greenwald was information about JTRIG activities that had started in 2011. Entitled Behavioural Science Support for JTRIG's Effects on Online HUMINT, which is Human Intelligence Operations, it describes the types of targets on which the unit focuses, the psychological and behavioural research it commissions and exploits, and its future organisational aspirations. It is authored by a psychologist, Mandeep K. Dharmi, who specialises in the research of judgment and decision-making. The document explains out the tactics the agency uses to manipulate public opinion. Its scientific and psychological research into how human thinking and behaviour can be influenced, and the broad range of targets that are traditionally the province of law enforcement rather than the intelligence agencies. JTRIG's domestic and law enforcement operations are made clear. The report states that the controversial unit currently collaborates with other agencies, including the Metropolitan Police, the Security Services MI5, the Serious Organised Crime Agency, the Border Agency, Revenue and Customs, HMRC, and National Public Order and Intelligence Unit, NPOIU. The document highlights that key JTRIG objectives include providing intelligence for judicial outcomes, monitoring domestic extremist groups such as the English Defence League by conducting online HUMINT, denying, deterring or dissuading criminals and hacktivists, and deterring, disrupting or degrading online consumerism of stolen data or child porn. The key takeaway is that this manipulation can be and is directed at domestic targets. From the document, Operation Methods Techniques. All of JTRIG's operations are conducted using cyber technology. Staff described a range of methods and techniques that have been used up to date for conducting effects operations, and these include uploading YouTube videos containing persuasive communications to discredit, promote distrust, dissuade, deter, delay, or disrupt. Setting up Facebook groups, forums, blogs, and Twitter accounts that encourage and monitor discussion on a topic. Establishing online aliases or personalities who support the communications or messages in these videos. Establishing online aliases and personalities who will support these other aliases. Sending spoof emails and text messages from a fake person or mimicking a real person, and this is to discredit or promote distrust. Providing spoof online resources such as magazines and books that provide inaccurate information. Providing online access to uncensored material. Sending instant messages to specific individuals, giving them instructions for accessing these uncensored websites. setting up spoof trade sites or sellers that may take a customer's money and or send customers degraded or spoof products, interrupting communications between real customers and traders, taking over control of online websites, denial of telephone and computer services, contacting host websites and asking them to remove material. Also from the document, behavioural science needs. Staff identified various areas of behavioural science support that their effects in online human operations might benefit from. These mostly referred to social psychology and included the psychology of relationships, the cultural impact on social interactions, the psychology of trust and distrust, psychological profiling, developing realistic online aliases, psychology of persuasion, mass messaging, marketing, branding of YouTube videos, plausible excuses for not being able to communicate or interact with target online, effective delay tactics when dealing with online customers, online criminal behaviour, youth behaviour online, and online business operations. Also from the document, obedience is a direct form of social influence where an individual submits to or complies with an authority figure. Obedience may be explained by factors such as diffusion of responsibility, perception of the authority figure being legitimate, and socialization. Compliance can be achieved through various techniques including engaging the norm of reciprocity, engendering liking, e.g. via integration or attractiveness, stressing the importance of social validation by highlighting that others have also complied, instilling a sense of scarcity or secrecy, getting the foot in the door, i.e. compliance to a small request first, and applying the door in the face or lowball tactics, i.e. asking for compliance on a large request issue first and having hidden aspects to request that somebody has already complied with respectively. Conversely, efforts to reduce obedience may be effectively based around educating people about the adverse consequences of compliance, encouraging them to question authority and exposing them to examples of disobedience. Evidence shows that information can be transmitted via complex contagion, meaning the more times someone is exposed to an idea online, the more likely they are to adopt and share it. When social media tells people an item is going viral, their cognitive biases kick in and translate into the irresistible urge to pay attention to it and share it. There is also the concept of being part of a group. People are far less likely to question something if it means being ostracized from their group, particularly if the influencers at the top of the pyramid all seem to be singing from the same hymn sheet. Popularity boosts low-quality content. Further studies have shown that the greater the number of people who respond to a low-quality item on social media, the less likely others are to question it, and the more likely they are to share it. These are the average rates of liking or sharing and fact-checking low-quality social media posts depending on the post's popularity or engagement level. And this leads to the phenomenon of echo chambers, which we have definitely seen recently. The freethinkers of this world are surprisingly uniform in their outlook. Put simply, your social desire to conform distorts your independent judgment. Popularity signals can be gamed. If it appears that all your trusted sources are in agreement, then why wouldn't you go along with them? The problem arises if this information is incorrect, either by error or by design, by being fed through J-Trig. Manipulation of the internet can be seen through the dissemination of false material, sock puppet accounts, and the creation of echo chambers that present the world in a way that makes sense and provides psychological comfort for the participant, surrounded by like-minded people and free from doubt, because you have worked it out in a manner that makes sense of the world. An annual report on online freedom by the non-profit group Freedom House found evidence of advanced social media surveillance programs in at least 40 of the 65 countries analysed. The report said that global internet freedom declined for a 9th consecutive year as authorities in some countries simply cut off internet access as part of their manipulation efforts, while others employed propaganda armies to distort information on social platforms. Many governments are finding that on social media, propaganda works better than censorship, said Mike Abramovitz, who is the president of Freedom House. Other existing programs. CENTCOM. CENTCOM was a sock puppet account program used by the US military. Put simply, a single soldier could run a farm of online personalities that interact with the other users and spread information that is beneficial to the US military. Sock puppets give the impression of a far greater number of like-minded individuals and can create echo chambers. Sock puppets are often undetectable as they learn to react and develop their ways of interacting with targets to make them appear human. This allows the US military to create a false consensus in online debates and shout down opinions that they don't want to encourage. The CENTCOM contract stipulates that each fake online persona must have a convincing background, history, and supporting details, and that up to 50 US-based controllers should be able to operate false identities from their workstations without fear of being discovered by sophisticated adversaries. SMISC. The Social Media and Strategic Communications, or SMISC, program is run by DARPA. It is described as a method for detecting and conducting propaganda campaigns on social media. DARPA have cited two reasons for its existence. Firstly, to allow the military to better understand what is happening on social media, and secondly, to distribute its own propaganda and to control and influence online discussions. SMISC algorithms will be aimed at discovering and tracking the formation, development, and spread of ideas and concepts, or memes, on social media. According to DARPA, this is done via persuasion campaign structures and influence operations. For more information on these types of programs, please read my previous blog on JTRIG, which is Cambridge Analytica, JTRIG, and other manipulation campaigns. Conclusion. We can't prove that JTRIG or some other type of manipulation program has been used here, but it would not surprise me, as we can certainly draw parallels with what has happened in regards to the spreading of information regarding COVID. What we can prove, beyond a shadow of a doubt though, is that much of the COVID denial information has actually come from a source close to the government. Whilst this appears to be an attack on the government or anti-establishment, it is in reality a double bluff, a campaign to give the government an alibi, to create doubt, and to ultimately cause enough confusion to contribute towards the privatisation of the NHS. I'm afraid that the alternative media has been tricked on this one. They have built up their own view on this on fallacies, lies spread by the government themselves.